share my screen and what we're going to be talking about today. I'm assuming that that's coming in clear for everybody. Let me just tell you a couple of things. I've already gotten a kind of offline a couple of instant messages from people. As you guys know, we've been having really good response to these trainings, and so Google Meets only allows us to do 250. Well, we had 680 plus sign up for this discussion today. And so some of you are streaming. If you are streaming, to be fair, there is no chat feature. So when Shane talks about the chat feature, it's only for those that are in the Google Meet and who didn't get put on the stream feature. So you'll still be able to hear and participate that way, but no, you will, if you're streaming it, you won't be able to. In fact, let me tell you something quickly too. Some of the feedback that we've been getting about these webinars is, and of course we know this, but we'd like it to be more interactive. So we're actually going to try something today. Which is at once, maybe twice, I'm actually going to stop and say, okay, do you have any questions? And we'll ask you to submit any questions or discussion points you think the group needs to talk about in the chat feature. We won't have you do it verbally, unmute your mics, because, if we get 6 or 7 people talking at the same time, that'll be pretty chaotic. So if along the way you have questions or you think there are things we need to dig into deeper, please feel free to address that. The other thing that I'm going to tell you is we're trying to accomplish a couple of things with these webinars. A lot of us are in a position where we still need to keep social distance. We're teleworking, or if we're going to the office, maybe our colleagues aren't, and live instruction isn't really available. So we want to do things where we are still developing, where we're still improving our skills as managers, as leaders, as people, as employees for the state of Utah. But we want to reach as large a group as we can. And so one of the compromises there is maybe this lack of involvement. But because we have such a large group, just know this is not meant to be a really deep, penetrating discussion. We're going to have to do, the cliche is the 30,000-foot view in this case of decision making. We'll get into some specifics, but the idea is that we want to give you things to think about. We want to start giving you ideas of things that you can start investigating on your own, leadership concepts, organizational concepts that are relevant, timely, maybe especially now, that you can go and follow up on. Either you can go back to these recordings, we'll give you some resources at the end of our discussion today. But I wanted to preface everything that we talk about today with that. So let me share with you an experience I had. This is actually, doesn't seem that long ago, but it really was. It was the Thanksgiving of 2003. So I had a brother who was at the University of Chicago. He's an archaeologist, and he was doing his doctoral work at the University of Chicago, #1 archaeology program in the country. Smart guy, really smart guy. But anyway, me and a buddy from home, I grew up in Hawaii, me and a buddy were like, hey, let's go hang out in Chicago, for Thanksgiving. This will be fun. So if you know anything about the University of Chicago, it's right in the heart of Chicago, but it's on the south side of Chicago. Now, you've probably heard about the south side of Chicago. It is not, to put things kindly, it's not the safest place in America. Let's put it that way. And you've got kind of this university smack dab in the middle of this kind of what we would call dangerous area. Well, one night, me and my buddy from this small town in Hawaii were like, it was after 9 o'clock, and we wanted to go. There's this place near my brother and sister-in-law's place called Ribs and Bibs, which you're seeing here. And we're like, hey, we want to go get these ribs, man. We want to have ribs. And they're like, okay, you guys, you just need to be careful though, right? So we decide to go to Ribs and Bibs. We go in, we get our plates, and we're walking out, and not far from where Ribs and Bibs is, kind of in between where my brother's apartment was and where this barbecue shack is, my buddy and I are walking, there's a McDonald's. And we see 3 guys rush out of the McDonald's and one guy running out in front of them. And this is about 20 to 25 yards in front of us. 3 shots are fired at this guy who's running from these 3 other guys. And we just stop. We're like, we are really close to what's happening here. I've never seen a shooting in my life. This guy is draped over a mailbox right in front of this McDonald's, and these 3 guys are, now this is all happening in seconds, right? And immediately from both ends, different ends of the street, two cop cars come rushing in, and then they immediately reverse a distance. So, and then the cops jump out and they're behind their doors with guns drawn. And in between these cop cars now and these shooters and this guy who's dying on a mailbox is me and my buddy. And we're just like, we don't know what to do here. In that moment, so the first thing, as this relates to our discussion today, we had people that knew the context better, knew the environment better, who said, this is probably not a good idea. This is probably not a good decision. After 9 o'clock at night, it's dark, to head down, 3 blocks or whatever it is to go to Ribs and Bibs to get some ribs. Wait and get them tomorrow, that sort of thing. Well, we didn't listen to the quote unquote experts in this case. And then the other decision point we had was more of this kind of, what does your gut tell you to do in the very instant that a decision needs to be made? And we're standing there where this shooting is happening or happened, and these cop cars, smarter than us, back up, and we're now in between them and where this shooting is going on. And I just remember saying to my buddy, I'm like, look, I don't want to be in a crossfire. I don't want to be anybody's hostage. And immediately we just turned down this other street, which was out of the way and not directly to my brother's house, but was just got us out of the quote unquote line of fire. Probably the right decision, but in that moment, we are not the people. The cops knew what they were doing, for sure. They had clearly been trained on this. Their reactions were good. We were just kind of frozen, as you might imagine. I want you to think about this in some of the ways that we're going to be talking about decision making today. So it's kind of a funky title, right? Blank, think, or kitchen sink, and it's how effective leaders make decisions. Or how leaders make effective decisions, when really we could have called it how do effective leaders make decisions, okay? Well, let's talk for a second about some of the famous decisions that we see made by leaders in history, right? We kind of know these by heart, right? If you're Truman, do you decide to and I hope these are going to be unpleasant, and I apologize for that, but do you make the decision to summarily end the war by dropping bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? If you're JFK, what do you do when there is nuclear missiles found in an island 90 miles off the shore of your country in Cuba, and Russia is arming Cuba with these missiles, and Russia runs the blockade that you've set up and other things? What decisions do you make, right? If you're Gerald Ford, do you pardon Nixon? At the time, maybe the most vilest man in America? Do you pardon him so we get over it? What about, of course, one that we're sensitive to here in Utah? The temperatures are going to be cold in Florida when you're launching the Challenger in '86, and the O-rings haven't tested well there. Do you launch anyway because you don't want another failure, right? You don't want NASA in the news for not being able to meet this launch and meet its deadline, that sort of thing. And then, of course, maybe more relevant today, you've got a pandemic. Do you open up the economy at the risk of lives, or do you take the risk with the economy and say, no, we've got to save lives. This thing is going to get worse. Is it spreading in isolated pockets, or is it statewide? These are the kinds of things that we know leaders for, and these are some of those famous kind of really difficult decisions that people have had leaders have had to face historically. So what is it then that makes great leaders? Because we could have debates about those events, right? Whether it was the right decision or not, or current events, right? We could have debates about the decisions being made. So what is it? The first thing that I have to do today, and I don't think this takes a lot of persuading, but the first thing that I have to do, that we have to discuss, is to convince you how central decision making is to your leadership effectiveness. Now, I recognize, by the way, that on our discussion today, there are lots of people that are currently in leadership positions, but also people that are going to be future leaders, right, or in future leadership positions. But what is it? How do we judge leaders? In fact, it's really interesting, you guys, as I ask this question to groups, not just in the state of Utah, but as I do engagements, with various parts of the country, I'll ask this question: how do we judge leaders? Right, and almost without fail, what comes up is results, right? Long-term success, and I think that's fair. It's hard to say that really effective organizational or political leadership happen if there's not good results. And so, quite frankly, the proof is in the pudding, right? Well, what we tend to do is we go back, we look in hindsight, and we say, okay, there was long-term success here. Let's go back and look at what they did. And then we'll say, okay, that makes for leadership effectiveness, right? And of course, hindsight is 2020, and sometimes we don't take into account all the variables, all the luck, maybe even sometimes that led to that success. But overall, like with a coach, with a military general, with organizational leaders, if there was sustained growth and economic success, blah blah blah, we say, yeah, okay, there was effective leadership. What I want to suggest to you today is that in between those two things is what we will call cumulative decision making. So you might have these leadership behaviors, right? But it was ultimately your long-term success as a leader hinges on the accumulation, right? The aggregate of the decisions that you have made or you will make as a leader. Okay, and I want you to think about that for a second, because this is really a not a bold statement, but a strong statement that I'm making. That really your long-term success and ultimately how you will be judged as a leader it hinges on cumulative decision making, your decision making, right? So look at this from Noel Tichy and Warren Bennis. Many of you will have heard certainly of Warren Bennis as a leadership guru. He says the thing that really matters is not how many calls a leader gets right, or we're not even looking at the percentage really, but rather how many of the important ones does he or she get right. So it's knowing when it's a critical decision. So it's not just simply, in other words, we can't put up some calculus here and say, well, if you get 75% of decisions right, then you're an effective leader. That's not it at all, and that's too simplistic. Okay, but it's what are you getting the important ones right? So do you know what the important ones are? And then are you getting those right? Okay, and then from Jim Clifton and Jim Harder, organizations succeed or fail based on leaders' decisions. Think about that. Organizations succeed or fail based on these decisions. And they give all these, different areas in which we make decisions: strategic direction, technology, ethical dilemmas, which we'll talk a little bit about, mergers and acquisitions, which we might have less to do with us. But you see there that organizations rise and fall. Your agencies, their success, their ability to provide services to the state of Utah rises and falls. That effectiveness rises and falls depends on our decision making. Okay. Now, here's that Clifton and Harder book. By the way, this is a book that I'll give you at the end of our discussion today as a recommendation. It's from Gallup, and it's not the kind of book that you take to the beach and read cover to cover. It's more of a reference book. But really interesting what they found. Really important book. They go through decades of Gallup doing these polls and studying leaders. And it says, look, they found a lot of stuff, but from like CEOs, from executive levels down to frontline supervisors, what have they discovered that separates great leaders from the rest? Well, they acknowledge that it's multidimensional, and there's lots of things, to be fair, lots of traits, but ultimately, the two most important traits that they identified for effective leaders from frontline down to up to executive levels: can you bring multiple teams together, right? Or if you're a team leader, can you bring multiple people together? And do you make great decisions? Think about that. Okay, of all the things, and trust me, I love all the other leadership things that we talk about. They're important, and they acknowledge that in saying that it's multidimensional. But there it is. Do you make great decisions? By the way, there's some fine print here that I want to draw your attention to. Where, see how it says it's the manager, and it says Gallup finds that the quality of managers and team leaders, frontline supervisors, that's you, is the single biggest factor in your organization's long-term success. And this, I love finding this, and I loved having data for this, because it's something that I've believed and we teach in our classes for a long time, that frontline supervisor plays a critical role. This is not to diminish mid-level or executive level folks who are participating today, but even sometimes it's easy for us to say, well, the executive director has to make tough decisions. No, decisions are made at all levels of leadership, right? Look at Peter Drucker, kind of considered the management guru of the 20th century. Said most discussions of decision making assume that only senior executives make these decisions, or that their decisions matter, right? This is a dangerous mistake. So another job that we have today, aside from convincing ourselves how important decision making is to our leadership effectiveness, is increasing our awareness of just how often you and I are actually involved in discussions where decisions are being made, or meetings where we would call it a discussion or a decision-making meeting, but that's exactly what's happening. So think about this. This is just kind of thrown together, but here are the things that where you and I, maybe the more obvious ones where we have to make decisions. Anybody who's got a formal leadership, supervisory management position, and hiring, huge, right? Getting the right people on the bus, so to speak. How you deliver assignments, how tasks are divvied up, budgets. I don't want this to be a gloom and doom conversation today. There potentially, because there are some really tough decisions coming up that you and I might have to make if the legislature meets this month and says we need budget cuts at 2, 5, or 10%. We're going to implement those, right? So certainly decisions about budgets and how those are allocated. Whether or not to have difficult conversations with employees. We'll talk more about that. I love this. J.J. Acker, who you guys listened to 2 weeks ago, I was having a discussion with him. He said, what about multiple competing priorities? That is so true. You and I have to make decisions all the time about what's going to get most of our attention. Of the various myriad tasks that are assigned to us and the various stakeholders that we have to satisfy, which ones take precedence? Which one deserves more of our time and attention? And then even just to act or not to act, to share information or not to share information, right? These are all decisions that we make. And then one more point here, and I've already shared this with you, and this is a quote by me at, I should say, about 10:18, but anyway, decision-making meetings and discussions and conversations, they happen more often than we think, right? And rarely does it start with, okay, guys, we need to make a decision. Sometimes it does, and of course, you're then in an important decision-making conversation or meeting. But very often, without us saying, time to make a decision, we are making decisions, or we're having conversations that will later impact a decision. So we need to become more aware of that, okay? Now, here's our grid for the day. Is it blink, think, or kitchen sink? Now, let me jump into, I need to stop soon to see if there are any questions. But let me just stop here. Let me just keep going for really quickly here and explain about blink, think, or kitchen sink. I'm going to keep coming back to this table. Okay, guys. Now, blink here is intuition crisis. It's when it's time limited, domain expertise matters, and communication matters. Well, there it is, so you can see our table, but I'm going to jump into this a little bit more. Okay. So blink is probably better explained as intuition. Now, I use the term blink intentionally as kind of a reference. Many of you will know Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. And he says, oh, people can make great decisions just, with their intuition and just kind of closing their eyes and making a call and a judgment. And what I don't want to do, and it's going to seem like I'm doing this, I don't want to pile on or poo-poo intuition too much, because intuition matters. Your gut speaking to you matters. It is especially critical in a crisis when there isn't time to gather a committee or for you to spend a week and a half thinking nothing about this choice that you have to make. Now, let me tell you, when this blink or this intuition for decision makers is particularly relevant. Probably the person that did the best study on this intuition or this blink is a guy named Gary Klein. And I'll give you a reference to one of his books at the end of our discussion. But Gary Klein, who has a thing called recognition prime decision making. Now, he studied actual decision makers in action, primarily firefighters, and this is kind of interesting, but chess masters. It doesn't seem like a crisis, someone playing chess, but when you have that clock, you've got to make these immediate decisions. Now, Gary Klein's argument, and others, by the way, says that, yeah, that intuition is really good when you have particular domain expertise. In fact, he had this experience with a firefighter. They go into this house, right, and there's a basement and a first floor, and there's obviously visible fire there on the first floor, and he's got his fire crew there, and immediately at the top of his lungs, he's yelling and signaling for his fire crew to get out of there. Okay, and he didn't even really know why cognitively. And then seconds after they leave, the floor, that first floor, caved in to the basement where the real center of the fire was. Now, you couldn't have seen that. And it was like, well, how'd you know? He's like, I don't know. right? Now, we hear stories like that, and usually most of our heroic notions of leadership revolve around this, like, ooh, that gutsy call in the crisis moment, where, the football coach goes for it on 4th and 15. They just knew the exact play to call. The general calls, for a charge, in that heat of the battle. And that's all good, and that does happen, like it did for this fire chief, for his crew. But what that fire chief had, and when blink or intuition as a decision-making method is particularly useful, is when there's domain expertise. In other words, you wouldn't take that fire chief or that chess master into another context, and they would have the same ability to make those seemingly gut feeling calls that they can't really articulate, or we can't explain through cognitive or rational means. Does that make sense? Now, this is critical, because you and I will often think like, oh, it's the hallmark of a leader that they can just make those calls. Well, yeah, that's true if they've got that domain expertise. And again, we don't want to ignore gut. You're going to see blink in both involved with both think and kitchen sink. But we want to do it primarily when there's a crisis, right? When it's time limited and you've just got to make a call. The other thing that we'll touch on here in a second is that as a leader, when you make that kind of call without involving others, you want to be able to articulate. We'll talk about how to do that in a second here. You see here from Colquitt, Lapine, and Wesson, these scholars, who say that it's a function, this ability to do that, this intuition, this blink decision making, is a function of tacit knowledge. In other words, that's our domain expertise, right? So you can be confident in doing it. Like, I know this circumstance, I've seen it time and time again, or I don't know why I feel this way, but I'm making this call because my gut's telling me to, and we've got to make a call. There's no time to deliberate. Okay, so that's kind of the quick and dirty on blink. Now let me go into communication matters here, and I'm going to go through this really quickly. It's kind of a silly. You remember there was this flooding recently in Michigan. I don't know why I picked that. That's some of the damage that was done in these floods in Michigan. I just know that for my wife, seeing Taco Bell inoperable is kind of a crisis and kind of a devastation. In fact, we had Taco Bell last night. But anyway, here is what Carl Weck, I think is how you pronounce the name. He's a crisis, University of Michigan. He's a crisis management. Actually said, look, leaders, when you, and this is fine, if you're within that domain expertise or you're in a crisis and you've got to make that judgment call. I don't want to read this verbatim to you, but here are 5 things that you need to make sure you communicate to your folks. You got to tell them, right, here's how I read the situation. And I'll have you notice, by the way, those of you that have taken communications from me in the past, the qualifying language that is here. Here's what I think we face. Just, in other words, acknowledging this is how I'm reading the situation, right? Here's my opinion on it. I don't have perfect knowledge of this, right? So here's what I think it is, and here's what I think we should do. Like, I'm going to tell you specifically, here's specific directions that I think we should take and why. Because I think it's going to solve A, or I think it's going to accomplish B, right? And then finally, but keep on the lookout for this in case I totally misread the situation. Blink is not surefire. Our intuitions sometimes mislead us, as we'll talk about here in a second. And so keep your eye on that I've gotten this wrong, and then now talk to me, right? Now this one is if it's a crisis and you've made a call, but there is some time for feedback, right? Talk to me, let me know that you know what I've asked you to do. It's make sure there's no miscommunications, right? And that we didn't miss something glaring, okay? So again, some of you are going to be frustrated. You're going to say, oh, that's useful for me if I have to communicate this way in a crisis or something, but I didn't have time to write it down. Remember, we're recording this, and you'll be able to go back and review this, right? So now a couple things I have to warn you against about blink, right? It's really inspiring when we get those intuition calls and they're right, but we don't want to always rely on it. In a crisis, we don't have a choice, okay? So this is from Daniel Kahneman. By the way, this is just, think about like when you're sliding in a car. Can I tell you, I've had situations where my car is sliding. In fact, one really scary time, we were in Michigan, actually visiting family, and trying to get to the airport early morning. This is winter in Michigan, and we're sliding off into a ditch. Do you know in that moment, my knee-jerk reaction is not to, okay, slide into it, turn the wheels into it, or whatever they tell us to do. It's panic, and that's probably because I don't have driving domain expertise. Partly, but sometimes blink fails. So the problem is, you and I tend to be overconfident in our intuitions, right? We all tend to think that we've got this thing that we can tap into, that we can be like, oh no, I've got this right. So Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel Prize winner in decision making, psychological economics, and sometimes, you guys, we take the intuition or blink approach to decision making, even when we don't need to, because it's less effort. It takes cognitive effort to go into what we'll go talk about here in a second, into think, and we say, nah, I pretty much know what to do here. I'm just going to go with what my gut tells me. It's like you and I would have been better off if we had stopped, not just gone with our gut, but checked our assumptions, really thought about it critically, checked for our biases that we have, things like that. Okay, and we'll talk about this, that our conclusions come first, often then the arguments follow later as well. So I'm going to do an experiment with you. So everyone, I know some of you are probably not even looking at the screen, and some of you are probably just listening, but I want you to look at the screen here for a second. This is an example of how blink sometimes fails us, okay? And no cheating, okay? Some of you will get this right. Some of you, we're not going to take roll for, how many got it right, how many got it wrong here, but see if you can tell me, what is your knee-jerk answer to this, okay? A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Okay. Now, if you are like most people, you probably said, well, the ball costs a dime. It's $1 and a dime. But then the bat doesn't cost $1 more than the ball. Our minds, our blink goes to, oh, okay, it's 10 cents and $1, and that's not the case, right? That's not the case. It's 5 cents, right? It's $1.05 for the bat and 5 cents for the ball. Which I don't know what era this question came up with, where a bat and a ball would cost you that cheap, but you get the point, right? The other one that you have seen before, by the way, there's a famous name. This is a famous exercise, by the way, that Kahneman has done. I'll show you this, right? If you look at this and you tell people just the horizontal line there, the two horizontal lines, which one is longer? Right? Our blink tells us, well, the top one is much longer. My gut tells me that, right? And yet the evidence, of course, is no, actually they're identical. And yet, so our intuitions can fail us, right? Based on faulty perceptions, biases. Sometimes our gut can just flat out get it wrong. And so while blink is good, we want to be very careful. So what we want to do now is we want to go from blink to think. And Daniel Kahneman here again says, I love this, by the way, that leaders have to learn to recognize the situations in which mistakes are likely, and try to avoid those significant mistakes, right? Especially when the stakes are high. Now, the problem is, you guys, the problem is it's easier for us to recognize other people's mistakes. Oh, they made a bad call. Oh, they're not thinking about this clearly, or here are their biases, or here are the traps they're ignoring as they make decisions. There are times for blink, and blink is even part of think. Now, this is starting to sound like Dr. Seuss. But anyway, blink is part of think. But we have to get in that situation where we can recognize that we're not as good at blink as we think we are. So so here's blink, and now here's think. Okay. Now before I go any further, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm not going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm going to ask Shane and the group. We can only take a question or two here, and we probably want you to submit it by chat. But does anybody have anything that we need to talk about? Any questions that need to come up that we need to process further? Now let's take a minute now to see how we're doing with that. So Shane, I'll kind of turn the mic over to you if you want to let us know. Anything?
So far, we're good.
Okay. that I'm going to, sorry guys, once I get going, I can ramble. So I'm going to keep rambling here, okay? And by the way, if at any point you have questions, we'll catch up to them later. So just submit them, right? So let's jump into think here. And think again is know your limits. And by the way, know your limits here with this think approach where we can take more time to actually process cognitively the tough decision that we have to make. Know your limits, know human limits to decision making. We'll spend some time talking about the hidden traps of decision making. Then we'll talk about the importance of experience and phronesis, and then make sure we're asking the right questions. Then we'll talk about blink and that relationship with think and blink. I love this, by the way, from Will Rogers. Good judgment. We'll talk about experience here throughout. Just like expertise and experience matters for blink, it matters for think as well. Good judgment comes from experience. And often, of course, that comes from bad judgment, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but very often, you guys, we think that we are rational actors when it comes to decision making. And so there are economists who subscribe to this kind of rational actor approach, would say, oh yeah, decision makers are always going to be logical and rational and choose the best option. Well, we know that's not true. Sometimes we just choose the easiest option, which is satisficing, or they're going to consider all alternatives equally. It's like, no, sometimes we take them one by one. Sometimes we don't even know what our goals are in decision making. Your goal might be to make the best decision. Mine is to get my way and actually win the argument, even though I think yours might be the better idea. And the other thing, this might be the most important one, that decision makers, as if rational choice theory says, I can take in all information about a problem and make a decision. And we just know that that is not true. We have, it's called bounded rationality. You and I have limited capacity, time, mental capacity, etc., to take in information. And so we have to make decisions without perfect information, right? The other thing, of course, is that we're making factual decisions when it's like, no, we have biases and perceptual issues. And anyway, so I just like this Jerome Groupman here, right? Relying too heavily on intuition has its perils. It's cogent medical judgments are made with deliberate analysis and blink and first impressions and intuition, right? How those things are married there. Okay, so now I want you to pay particular attention that this might, I don't want to bias the rest of this thing, but this might be of the most use to you, okay? These hidden traps in decision making. I'm going to share 5 of these with you. And as I go through these 5, I want you to think about the ones that might be kind of your pet traps, so to speak, when you make decisions. By the way, this applies not just in your organizational leadership roles, but everywhere in our lives where we have to make decisions. We tend to have these traps. So the anchoring trap is that the mind, we give disproportionate weight to the first information we receive. And that's why negotiators use it. So if I'm a negotiator, I start with a really high price, right? Because then in your mind, it's like, oh my gosh, that's the anchor point. We're starting there. I was going to go $100,000 lower than the $250,000 you said, but now I feel weird because you anchored us there. So maybe I'll start at 200,000 because that seems really low comparatively. It's why negotiators use it as a tactic, right? So let me give you an example. This is also, by the way, from 1974. Think about that, from Daniel Kahneman, this power of the first information that our minds process. Okay, I'm going to show you something here, okay? Look at these two. If you had to guess, and some of you have calculators, don't cheat, but if you had to do this equation in your head quickly, what do you think, without really doing it, what do you think the top one comes up to, and what do you think the bottom one equals out to? Well, some of you are saying, dude, it's the exact same. And of course, that's true. It equals the same. But do you know, when you give this as a give us your snap judgment to people, when they see the 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 equation, they say about 2,000. When you give people the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they say 500. Isn't that it? Because when they see the 8, it's bigger and they're anchored in that, and it seems like it'll be a higher number. When you start with the 1, it's lower, and they go, I don't know, about 500. That anchoring is a real thing. By the way, the answer is like 40,320. So we're all really bad at math, or at least in 1974 they were. So what do you do about this anchoring trap? Well, the first thing, of course, is to be aware of it, and then try using alternative starting points. And come up with your own perspective of information And don't anchor others, especially subordinates. In other words, don't always give them the same information first. Or if we get new information. By the way, think about this with COVID-19 and how, the information, if the first information I heard was that, I don't know what the latest is, but right now that asymptomatic people can spread the disease. Well, I think the latest is now they're thinking asymptomatic people cannot. It'll be hard for my mind to get over that. In fact, I'll share with you. I can't remember if Shane mentioned this in the bio or not, but I do a lot of work with a group called the Gettysburg Leadership Experience. And at Gettysburg, we have these modules, and we do them in particular chronological order based on day 1, day 2, day 3 of the Battle of Gettysburg. Well, it's so funny because day 1 is always the same module on kind of anticipatory leadership. And it's always the one in evaluations that gets the most attention. I'm not convinced necessarily that it's the best or more impactful by itself, but because it's the first experience that people have when they come to this Gettysburg leadership experience, it always gets the most attention in evaluations. Now, here's what's interesting. I shared this because one of my colleagues was like, well, that's obviously the most important. I said, well, it's first. And so it kind of gets anchored in there in terms of its importance. And they agreed, they understood that. But even to this day, because the first information we get is that it gets the highest or most significant placement in evaluations, they can't let go of that information. That's this power of anchoring trap. When I hear a number or data first, it's hard for me to let go of that. Okay, so especially leaders, you want to make sure that you're not anchoring other subordinates. The other thing I'll tell you, by the way, too, is it's interesting in terms of think of your decision making with hiring. Generally speaking, the people that we see first, that we interview first in the hiring process, we tend to give higher scores to. And in fact, the last time I had an interview, I brought this up I was the interviewee, and I brought it up to the interviewer. It's probably not the best way to start an interview, but I said, because I went in the afternoon, and I knew they had done a bunch. I'm like, hey, just by the way, there's a lot of evidence that the later in the day and the later sequentially that the interview takes place, the lower the person's rated. I'd just like you to keep that in mind. Pretty obnoxious, but anyway, I don't think it cost me. But anyway, so that's the anchoring trap. Okay, I'm going to move through these quickly. Okay, the next should seem very familiar to you and me. This is the status quo trap. Right? This is you and I make decisions and we show a strong bias towards keeping the status quo. Why would that be? It's because breaking the status quo, if what we've been doing is the way that we've been doing it, breaking the status quo means taking action, and then that's when we become susceptible to criticism and judgment. We get out of our, so to speak, our comfort zone. And if we just keep doing what we've always been doing, we're less likely to get criticism. Okay? And so people have this tendency towards the status quo. The problem is, of course, you guys, is it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best decision. Now, there's some people that say that it's hard for me to even come up with an example of this, because there's some people who say this is how government is defined. Is this, now I don't think this is true. I think this is true of people everywhere, but in particular, people would accuse us in government of being married to the phrase you and I know, well, why do we do it? It's because it's the way we've always done it. Right? So what do you do about this to overcome the status quo trap? Well, you got to first recognize that the status quo, actually perpetuating the status quo might be the best choice, but don't choose it just because it's comfortable. And you have to ask yourself, I'm going to jump to number 3 here. Would you choose it if it weren't the status quo? In other words, can you lay all the options on the table as if they were equal and then say, what if that weren't the status quo now? Would we go opt for that right now? And then 2 and 4 are kind of similar. You've got to focus on big picture objectives. If you're making a decision because you're in a rut or you need a change is needed, well, then that comfort level of the status quo might really be problematic for you, might really cost you. And we know industries, right? We know corporations, maybe Blockbuster, Kodak is now becoming a famous example where they kind of refused, Nokia even, where they kind of said, no, we've got this market share, we're not changing it, it was working for us. Well, it might not work for you in the future. That value of the status quo may change. Okay, so this is one that we want to be particularly careful of. Related to status quo trap, this is an important one, is the sunk cost trap. These are decisions we make because we're going to keep doing something because we've already invested so much. So it's like status quo, but we're going to do it because we don't want to admit that we made a mistake. And I hope this isn't offensive to anyone, but the example that's usually given here is, historically for us in America, is the Vietnam War. We know from the Pentagon Papers that it's far back as 1955, when it was the French who were fighting in Vietnam, because it was a French colony, right? That we knew that a war fought in Vietnam was not likely to be successful, or we wouldn't even really know how to determine a victory there over the communist North Vietnamese as far back as 1955, and yet American presidents has kept from as far back as Eisenhower into the Nixon administration, and even into Ford. No, let's keep putting resources and American blood and treasure in Vietnam, right? It's the ultimate, well, we've already spent so much, we can't just pull out now because it's a failure, right? And what you have there is a screenshot from the Wall Street Journal. And there, look, so I'm from Hawaii, so I pay attention to the news there. There's this rail system there that is just, I think it's, I don't know if the word is boondoggle or something, but you see here, Wall Street Journal called it a $9 billion debacle, where the people didn't want this rail system, and yet they went gung-ho with it, and they just kept getting into more and more debt. And so they kept going with it. Now, Warren Buffett says, you'll know Warren Buffett, right? He says, when you find yourself in a hole, the worst thing to do is to keep digging. That's what we're talking about with the sunk cost trap. So what do you do about it? Another thing relative to this is called escalating commitment, where you're throwing good money after bad because you're like, I don't want to admit we made a mistake. So what you want to do to make sure you're not falling victim to the sunk cost trap is seek out the views of those uninvolved in the first place. People who are not married, their egos are not tied to this decision. And they can come in and say, no, that's stupid. We should stop doing that, right? So don't let your ego keep you from moving on. The other thing is, this is really common from subordinates. If I'm your subordinate and this was my project and or my idea, of course, why wouldn't I say, no, we got to keep going with this, right? Because I don't want to say I made a mistake. And yeah, sorry, it just cost us all this time and money and investment, right? And now similarly for leaders, don't create a culture of fear of failure, right? Don't create a culture in which people would be encouraged to fall victim to the sunk cost trap. And in fact, if I had someone who was willing to show the courage, now look, I don't want to reward people making dumb decisions and getting choice after choice wrong and showing bad judgment. But if I've got someone who on one occasion says, I know this was my call, I know this was my idea, I think we need to change it. Even if they had to push you into that decision in the first place, I would want to honor that. I would want to recognize that, because now you're creating an environment where people are not going to be married to this sunk cost trap, this tendency towards escalating commitment. Okay. Now, two more here. Stay with me. There's the confirming evidence trap, which is, this, right? We know this about human nature. We tend to seek out information that supports our existing point of view. So and when we get information that contradicts that which we already believe, we ignore it. And so that's why I've got Fox News here and MSNBC, right? These two things. Because if I tend to have conservative views, I kind of only listen to Fox News. And if I hear something from MSNBC, I discount it. And if I have more liberal views, I hear something from Fox, I'm like, oh yeah, Fox News, right? Now, this is really problematic for us as leaders trying to make good decisions in organizations. We need to objectively seek out information with equal rigor. And here's, by the way, number 2, overcoming this trap. We need to seek out, we need to assign a devil's advocate. And I've never seen anything in all that I've read on decision making that didn't advise this. So think about this for a second. You're actually assigning someone to play devil's advocate. So if you're all going down one road, to actually kind of to poo-poo the information you're absorbing or that the team's absorbing, and to say, nah, let me tell you why that's bogus information. Now, some of you are listening to this and saying, I don't really need to assign that because we've got Jim, and Jim does that all on his own, right? And that's fine, right? But if you assign someone to do it, you make it safe, okay? The other thing, of course, is check your motives for gathering information. Are you doing it just to confirm that what you already know? And then finally, don't ask leading questions. You're going to see this in the next one as well. But leading questions are, we're in a team meeting and maybe I'm the director and I say, hey guys, I think we should do this, this, and this. What do you think? Well, guess what they're going to tell you? Most of the time, we are asking to be brown-nosed. We are asking for people to say, well, yeah, that's a pretty good choice because ... all because I asked a leading question that's going to give me confirming evidence, right? Then our final example here is the framing trap. I love this one, okay? It's the way you frame a problem profoundly influences the options that you see and even the way you think about a problem or a decision that you have to make, right? So what you do about this, and I'll explain the examples here, is don't accept the initial frame. Reframe things. Look for ways to restate the problems. And by the way, just as a piece of advice, you and I, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, are more motivated to avoid loss than we are to get gain. It's really kind of interesting, and that's why sometimes you'll see gas stations, other things, there's like a discount for using cash versus credit card, things like that, right? Let me tell you kind of a weird thing. Those of you, it's called a plate lunch, Hawaiian food, right there. You see at the top of the page. There's a place, and I hope no one's like their family doesn't own Mobetta's, but anyway, there's a place that's really popping up all over the state called Mobetta's Hawaiian food. And it's pretty good. I like Mobetta's, but one of the things they do there is they put meat, you order your food, and they put meat on a scale, which is like, first of all, the least Polynesian thing in the world. But anyway, put food on the scale, and then they slowly take it off until they've gotten the right weight on there. That is such a turnoff. I would rather them either not make it visible to you, not have the scale, or put less on. Think about this, or think of the difference of putting less on and adding more meat until they get to the right point. Greg Hughes, former Speaker of the House, the guy who's actually running for governor right now, I remember he shared with me, this is probably 2 years ago now, the story of the two candy stores, same thing. Sold the exact same product at the exact same price, but one put a little candy on the scale and then added until it got to the weight you ordered, and one put too much on and took off, and one sunk and one thrived because of the way they framed it, okay? The other, think about this. I remember working with a manager who had to make the decision of whether to confront an employee about something they were doing, and they really didn't want to do it. They were having a hard time deciding whether or not to do it because they were scared about how this employee was going to react. And then we framed it differently. They had a team of 8, and everyone knew that this one employee was not carrying their weight and was a problem employee. And so when we reframed it, they said, look, I don't want to tick off this one employee. They're going to get aggressive, and they're going to, I said, okay, look, your choice is not tick off this employee or not. It's, what if we were to look at it as you're going to be celebrated by 7 employees for addressing this problem behavior and this performance from this one employee. And just changing that perspective made them realize, changing that frame made them realize, yeah, you know what, that is an option for me. Okay, so by the way, the other one there is that you see the Constitutional Convention there, 1787. I shared this a lot, so I apologize, but you guys, after this summer of 1787, they had to go to the states to ratify the Constitution. Well, it was not a sure thing by any means. But one of the things those that were fans of the Constitution did is they co-opted the name Federalist. Well, their opponent, who actually had more Federalist system ideology and desires, had to take the name Anti-Federalist. So when people, state delegations went back to their states and their conventions, it was the Federalists, even though they were less Federalists than the Anti-Federalists, versus Anti-Federalists, where people had Federalist tendencies and said, well, I want to go with the Federalists, right? And Herbert Storing, this famous political scientist who studied this, said, yeah, it's kind of a coup, just simply because they framed it as, well, we're the Federalists, and if you're not for it, then you're Anti-Federalist. Anyway, okay. We're still in Think here, and I'm running out of time. Shocker. Let me just share with you, make sure you're asking the right questions, right? This is a quote from Joseph Badaracco. He's at Harvard Business, right? I won't read that to you, but here are 3 questions as you're making tough decisions. And by the way, I want you to, these are 3 questions that I've been sharing with different groups as I've been doing consulting and other things. I want you to particularly think about these 3 questions as we make tough decisions as it regards budgets and things like that might be potentially coming up. The first is, if you make a certain decision, what are you communicating? By choosing this over that, what are you communicating to people? Because those decisions that you make, your team, your employees, your customers are looking at that, and they are messages to them. simply because of the choices you made. Next, you ask, does this align with our values? What are our values? And helping you make these tough decisions will be your values. That should always be your guide. What matters to us? And then lastly, what culture are we creating? Because decision points are huge culture creators, okay? Now, I want to share one more thing with you here, and that is, this is not Joseph Badaracco, by the way, that's Niccolo Machiavelli. And the reason I share this is because what are you communicating? Does this align with our values, and what culture are we creating? Are very kind of aspirational questions. You also have to think of the very pragmatic things. So those of you will know what it means to be Machiavellian, right? To be very political and calculating. And as lacking nobility as that might seem, you do have to consider, when you're making tough decisions, what will our stakeholders think of this? Politically, is this viable? Okay. And so I just add that there as a kind of a reminder that as good as and noble as those questions are on the right, you do have to say, okay, what do our stakeholders think? So maybe do a stakeholder analysis and really interpret the politics of things, because there's always politics involved, and that's certainly true of decision making. Okay. One of my colleagues made fun of me and said, "Oh, let me guess, Lincoln's going to be in here." I will share this quickly with you. One of the things is, and we're still in think here, as you become better at making decisions, one of the things that will make you better is experience, right? So practical wisdom, or the Greek word is phronesis, right, comes as you have experiences with things, with specific situations. And that's why you see from Coopers and Statler there, Aristotle, who's on the right, says that this phronesis, or practical wisdom, how to make good decisions, comes with experience or actual lived situations. So let me share with you really quickly how we do this, okay? Now remember, all this is going to be recorded. Feel free to revisit this, and this is kind of review for you guys anyway. But the first thing is to understand, honor experiences. In other words, know how important personal and collective narratives are, experiences are to us. The second is to process experiences. That is, every single one of us has life experiences. Lincoln, the reason Lincoln is here is because Lincoln was an executive during a war. He had never held an executive position in his life. He'd only served a two-year term in Congress. And he'd never led a military. The only military experience was during the Black Hawk War. And he said the only thing he fought was mosquitoes. And yet somehow Lincoln had this capacity, showed this excellent decision-making capacity in the most pressure-packed situation possibly our country ever faced. And one of the reasons for that is because he had this ability, this capacity to remember experience. He had a mind. He said he was very smart. He said once he experienced something or he learned it, it stayed stuck. Right, it stayed in his mind, and he knew how to process these experiences. It enhanced his wisdom, so to speak, right? Then you connect experiences. Tie your personal experiences that you have as you process these. Make connections to things, okay? Make connections to your experiences. Then adopt experiences. That is not just your own experiences, but this is the value of reading history, of reading other people's experiences, because then you can adopt them and learn from them. And then finally, we might not be like Lincoln, right? We might not have these steel trap minds, but we retain experiences. Some of you, that might mean writing them down, right? I'm not telling you all to go out and start a journal, but it's not the worst idea in the world for these things, these experiences that might serve as lessons for you and what you got out of it, right? That's how we enhance our experience, which matters for both blink and think. Okay. Now, one thing I want to share with you quickly, holy smokes, I'm running out of time, is, so stay with me, guys, think creatively. How do we do this? Because a lot of times we have these tough situations. Is there a way that we can actually apply new solutions to problems? The first thing, if you want to, the evidence for how creativity comes, it's not just these creative geniuses that have these sudden flashes of brilliance, right? Now, creativity skills exist, and some people have it more than others, but you and I can do things to enhance our creativity skills. And if you're looking to enhance the creativity skills of your team, if you want them to come with creative solutions, what's really interesting is the research says happiness leads to creativity. Think about that for a second. Employees with higher job satisfaction, quite frankly, are going to have higher creativity skills. Similarly, the more motivated I am to accomplish a task, this problem that I'm trying to solve, the more creativity, the more I can just focus on this problem and bring my inherent creativity skills to it, the better off we are. And then, of course, what's the third element that it's been throughout all of this? Expertise. The more I know about something, and the more I'm willing to really hone in and focus on something, and the happier, more light I am about this problem, the more likely I am to get creative solutions. So that's just really quickly. I would study more about this if you're interested in that kind of thing. In a nutshell, that's how we can increase our creativity. Okay, so winding up here, we've got blank think and kitchen sink. We've got know your circumstances, have tools, technology, blank and think, experience and expertise. Let me just tell you quickly, we're not going to talk about tools here today. I want you to know that we're not going to get into specific tools because it would take too long, and I'm already taking too long. But one of the things that our team does, the leadership development team for DHRM, is we come into agencies with specific tools for helping you make effective decisions. And we hope you utilize those tools and that experience that we have. So as you face tough decisions, just know that having tools can be really useful. Okay? So let me just tell you, kitchen sink here. Generally speaking, all things being equal, employee involvement, when you've got a tough decision to make, getting your employees involved is better. The last thing we want to do is think our employees know what they're running from, and then bam, right, something else hits them. You've made a decision without their involvement, and it impacts them, and they can involve it. On the right, I won't read all this, are all those good things that come when we involve employees, not the least of which is we get better solutions and we get buy-in from employees. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this either because we're going to conclude with this. But there are levels of employee involvement. The low end would be, look, you just make a decision on your own, and maybe it impact your employees, but you've got to make this call. Versus you seek out employees and say, hey, tell me what you think about this, or go get me information about this, or you talk to employees one-on-one, and they give you information, but it doesn't really impact your decision. Two, you get everyone together and you get them to collaborate and they give their input, but it may not reflect, their advice may not reflect or impact your decision. And then, of course, on the very end of the spectrum is, nope, this decision is ours to make collaboratively, right? Now, we are not going to go through this. This is Vroom, Yetman, and Yago's decision model is what this last slide, what it was taken from. This is really what the model says. I have no interest in going through this, right? And in fact, our plan was never through. It's so chaotic. So we're going to simplify it a little. This is Vroom and Yago in particular. They're when it's appropriate to use various levels of employee involvement. So you see the autocrat gopher there on the side, or as the first one. Well, before that, you've got the things to consider. Time. Is there a high risk of conflict? What's the nature of decision? Is it pretty obvious, or is it kind of a new decision problem that you've never faced before? How important is it that you get commitment from people? And what's their experience, or your team's experience or information levels? Well, you see there, I'm not going to go through all these, but autocrat and gophers, you make the call. And there's absolutely a time, guys, where you as leaders just need to make a judgment call. Okay, and you see all the elements there of when that might be appropriate. If time is critical, if your employees don't really know much about the problem, it's above their pay grade, so to speak, they're likely to be on board with you anyway, that's fine. Thought partner is when you go and you just say, hey, what do you think about? You take employees individually, and time, it might be critical, it might not, but there might be conflict between people, or maybe some people on your team have knowledge could contribute well to the problem and some couldn't, so it's no point in bringing them all together. And so you just say, I'm going to take them individually and ask them some questions, right? So they might have varying degrees, and you'll probably have commitment anyway. Judge and jury is when you get them all together and you collaborate, but you ultimately make the call. The whole point of this is, all things being equal, collaborative team is the best, right? Team involvement, but it's not always realistic. So judge and jury is, well, they might know, they may have valuable input, and the decision, it might not impact the team, but you'd like to get their thoughts for a decision that you have to make, or something that you have to go give to higher ups, or something like that, right? Finally, of course, is collaborative team, which is our optimal state, which is employees make a contribution, we're going to get their commitment, we want the conflict that comes from it, and time is almost a non-factor. And what I mean by almost, time is always a factor, but you've got days. You've got, weeks to come up with a decision. And so you can get people involved. Okay. Now, look, you guys, again, that is a really quick and dirty rush. I already know the evaluations are going to be, hey, there was way too much information here. That's fine. I want you to go back and look at this in the recording or through the slides that we can send you to make choices here. Okay. So last thing here is decision-making and technology. Thank you to the 375 of you that submitted that answered the survey about technological meetings. I'm going to show you some of that data. And by the way, as you do evaluations, if you would like, I'm probably just going to send out the overall survey to everybody so that you can see the responses from people. Let me tell you, by the way, this is a terrible looking Zoom meeting because everyone's hair is done. Everyone's got their picture up. It's very unrealistic, right? But anyway, here is the thinking on decision-making and technology that you have to be aware of. Because you guys, going forward, I think it is realistic to assume we are going to see teleworking more and more become the norm, even if COVID dissipates, and we get our vaccine. Let's, optimistically by December, more people are going to be teleworking. I just believe that, and I think it makes sense. I'm a fan of that, actually, if people want to. But most meetings, by the way, are decision meetings. And if it's not a decision meeting, if you don't need to get input, maybe it's time to use an email, right? Now, technology is changing the way that we communicate in meetings. Wall Street Journal something came up with research. It's called Zoom fatigue. There's a 1 second delay in our back and forth. There's streamed audio, so if one person's talking, it actually cuts out the other person that's talking and all this stuff. The other assumption is the way that we communicate impacts the volume and quality of our decision making, and therefore virtual meetings might have a negative impact on the quality of decisions we make. So think about this. If employee involvement is the ideal state and we want to get input as much as we can in decision-making meetings, here's what was reported. And again, there's lots more to this survey, but let me share this with you. A quarter of you said, I am more likely to make contributions in an in-person meeting. Now, the other thing that I will tell you is, 70% of you said, nah, it's the same as in-person is not. I think, while that may be true, I think some of us are not inputting as much as we think, and we might not even be aware that we're not because of this, what is called Zoom, even if we don't use Zoom fatigue, virtual meeting fatigue, and the technological problems and, the things like that. But even if just a quarter of people participating in your team meetings are sharing less, that could impact decision-making. Similarly, what about the quality of your contributions? A little less than a quarter saying, yeah, it's better in in-person meetings. I do better in in-person meetings. A quarter are saying that technological meetings are impacting what you're doing. Okay. Well, that's a problem. Well, what do we do about this? Here's the advice for how to make sure that, look, the only reason we care about meetings being more effective is not just so people hate them less. It's because they produce something, or they're supposed to produce something, and very often without us even realizing that those are decisions. So here's what you do. You acknowledge the communication challenges. You just be open that, some people are going to have their buttons muted, and you're going to call them out by name, and then they're going to take 10 seconds to answer, and then, of course, they're going to say, oh, sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. And that just happens over and over. Pay special attention to those that are less likely to contribute, because you'll see this in the data that we send out. Our concern is that people that are less likely to contribute in live meetings are going to be even more reticent in virtual meetings. And so you might need to call them out. The reason we have a picture of the Celtics here is Larry Bird once said he would play a game paying attention to, how many shots Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, and I think Cedric Maxwell were getting. And if it wasn't enough, he started noticing changes in their body language, and he'd make sure they were getting shots to keep them engaged. Same principle here. Okay. Be willing to take meetings offline. In other words, you have a decision-making meeting. Be willing to go have a separate meeting or say, hey, Dan, would you hang on the line afterwards? I wanted to get your thoughts on some things, right? Or have a separate meeting. It's funny to call it offline when it's still virtual and online. But put decision discussions up front when people still have energy in the meetings. Maybe if there's a discussion conversation, put that up at the beginning. And then, or similarly, if there's a discussion about a decision that needs to be made, send out that information before the meeting and say, hey, I want you to think about this. I want you to come with your thoughts and ideas, and then allow people to then process it, only have the discussion in the meeting. And then I would say you have to facilitate a meeting differently. More than you do in a live meeting. If you want to get sound information to help you make a sound decision, you need to actually call people out. So if two people start talking at once in person, we can kind of still hear both of them. But in virtual meetings, you can't, because the streamed audio cuts someone out. And so you might say, oh, okay, Joan, it seemed like you were going to say something. Please hold on to it and say it right after, right? You have to go out of your way to do that, because ultimately, guys, I like that we'll be teleworking more, I think, right? And I think we've gotten better at virtual meetings. It is not optimal communications. And not non-optimal communications impacts our decision making. So there's blink, think, and kitchen sink, you guys, kind of in a nutshell. That is rapid fire, 30,000 feet. But if nothing else, if we have accomplished nothing else today, guys, it's that you need to know how critical effective decision making is to your leadership success. Think back to those first slides. It is the hinge upon which long-lasting success and your leadership expertise or your leadership reputation rests. Now, here's the reading list that I promised. This, of course, will also be in the recording. I'm going to leave this up here for a second, but I just want to tell you right now, you guys, that I'm going to tell you how to cheat. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books on here. The one I want you to pay attention to is, see that third one that says HBR's 10 must reads, Smart Decision Making? It is a book, but it has 10 articles that are reader friendly. Here's where I'm going to help you cheat a little bit. If you don't want to spend the money or spend the time reading the book, most authors that make books that are worth reading also have articles on the very same topic. And Harvard Business Review has collected many of these articles. And so if you go get HBR's 10 must reads on ... on leadership, on decision making, on communication, it will have all these ideas, all their thinkers in summary. And you're not paying for 10 books, and you're not taking the time to read 10 books. So there's a list for you. I may come back to and put this on. Let me share one other thing with you. In 2 weeks from today, we'll have our next off-the-shelf webinar. I suspect he will not be as long-winded as me, but it'll be Lance Olson. I'm really excited for this one. You're going to want to participate. It's an introduction to the outward mindset, right, which is those award-winning books from Arbinger. He is a certified outward mindset facilitator, and he's going to take us through that, right? Next 2 weeks, I should say. So you'll be getting an announcement about this today. Please sign up for that. I think it's going to be fantastic. And again, thank you guys. I apologize for going over. I've never gone under, so this is not terribly surprising. But if you would please, it's useful for us if you fill out those evaluations. Thank you for your participation in these. They're kind of surfacey, that we can't get too deep, but we want to still be developing, even though we can't be in person together. So we're probably going to keep these off-the-shelf training series, these things going. And by the way, I'll stick around if there are any questions or things like that, but sign up for the one for 2 weeks from now and fill out the evaluation if you would. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate your time.